Hello and welcome back to FATBOSS TV, and today on the channel we're looking at the new 5-man dungeon that's coming out in 7.2, which is the Cathedral of the Eternal Night.
Yes, so this new 5-man dungeon has 4 bosses in it, and you're fighting through the upper parts of the Tomb of Sargeras raid, as we're here to kind of get the Aegis of Aggramar back, because it got stolen or something. I don't really know the lore.
No idea.
Yeah, so either way, to gain access to the new dungeon, you will need to be doing a small achievement quest chain, which mainly consists of doing the starter quest for the new Broken Shore Zone. It doesn't take very long, and you'll probably be wanting to do these first anyway on patch day, as they give you access to the new artifact traits, as well as higher levels of artifact knowledge. So the achievement is pretty much a byproduct of just generally doing your patch day activities in the first place. Now this dungeon has 3 difficulty levels. It has Heroic, Mythic, and Mythic Plus, and Mythic Plus has a 33-minute timer in which you need to complete the dungeon, so it's a sort of similar length to what you'll be having in a dungeon like Neltharion's Lair or Vault of the Wardens. So just like all of our other 5-man previews, we're going to go through the entire instance, talk about all the trash and the bosses and how they work, and then give some feedback at the end. So let's kick straight into it and look at the trash towards the first boss.
Now as you first zone into the instance and you reach this first area, you'll have to deal with a lot of trash mobs, and some of them have pretty impactful abilities. The Felgar Destroyers have a Shadow Wall. This is an AoE ability that just simply reduces the damage taken by mobs within its circle by 75%. Fortunately, this ability can be interrupted, so it's kind of important that that is constantly interrupted, just so you can deal significant damage to every single mob. The Soul Menders have a Demonic Mending cast. This simply just heals friendly targets. You've got to make sure you interrupt that also. The one cool thing that the Fellbringers do is that they'll put yellow circles on the ground. While you're stood inside them, you actually get a 50% haste increase, but the downside of it is that you do take quite a lot of ticking damage. And this circle actually affects enemies as well, so it's probably a good idea to drag them out of it, while your DPS stand inside it and just deal increased damage from the 50% haste they gain. But that all kind of depends whether or not your healer can actually keep them up. Now on the left as you enter, there is actually a mini-boss surrounded by lots of trash. Now this mini-boss has one single ability, which is Shadow Wave. This just sends a cone towards a random player, dealing a huge amount of damage and also leaving goo all over the floor. Pulling this boss with all the trash around him is pretty deadly, so it's probably a good idea to either CC the mobs or just to interrupt them and kill them off as soon as you possibly can, as all the abilities and all the damage on top of each other seems to be pretty lethal. However, it seems that you don't really need to pull this guy at all. His position within the instance is completely out of the way towards the first boss, so you could just ignore him. However, for Mythic Plus this might be important. You might need to kill him for that extra %, so you might as well know now. Now looking down off the balcony, you can actually see the area where you fight the first boss in the Tomb of Sargeras, which is Goroth, and you can actually jump straight off the edge down towards the raid, but you will die halfway down.
Yeah.
But the area around it, there are bats flying around. You can pull them as well if you like. However, these bats have really annoying abilities. They'll constantly knock back the tank with a shadow swipe, which can easily knock you into other trash, or they can even knock you off the edge. And on top of this, there are Fellblight Stalkers that just patrol around this balcony area that will teleport to players and then cast Devouring Magic on them, will actually silence them within an area, so you just need to make sure that you move out of those areas. Now halfway around this internal balcony, there's actually an external balcony that you can go out and stand on, and you can look down on the Broken Shore, which looks pretty damn nice. Now there are also multiple rooms dotted around this area that usually contain a hot tub, with sometimes some imps enjoying a bath or a suspicious looking Draenei couple with a couple of dogs.
In the hot tub.
In the hot tub.
Yeah, it's a bit weird.
Don't know what's going on there. These rooms actually have treasure in them sometimes, with the usual, artifact power or Order Hall resources. But as it appears, these rooms just seem completely optional, but again, might be important for Mythic Plus. Once you've made your way onto the other side of the room, on the other side of the balcony, you'll have the option to go up a spiral staircase to the second floor. And halfway up the staircase is a chapel-like room, which again can also contain artifact power chests. And this second floor is where you'll fight the first boss. However, there is some trash you need to deal with before you get to it. This trash consists of flowers that fixate you and explode when they reach you, so you need to make sure you kite them around. To add on top of that, there's also Vile Bark Walkers that knock back nearby players and also do a large amount of burst AoE damage to the group, as well as stunning and rooting you, so as you can imagine, this is kind of bad when there's loads of flowers about. There is also succubuses that have a channeled mind control effect. You need to make sure that you interrupt these. Also to interrupt is the botanists. They have an AoE effect, which is Blistering Rain, which deals ticking damage to your entire group. And they also have a casted Rejuvenation, which will heal nearby mobs. Once you've dealt with those guys and you've crossed the bridge towards the first boss room, you'll also have to deal with Stranglevine Lashers. These guys will lasso you and start bringing you towards them. This just deals quite a large amount of ticking damage. The tooltip in fact says to run away. I guess the idea is that you run so far and eventually it will break, but that didn't work for us. But it's safe to assume it will work something like that once you hit live. Once you've cleared out all that trash, it's time for the first boss, Aggramar.
Yes, so this fight is about controlling and killing flower ads whilst trying to kill the boss before he deals too much ticking damage to you. So he'll be spawning fulminating lashes that will spawn around the back of the room and fixate individual players. If they reach their fixated target and only their fixated target, they'll explode and deal a huge amount of damage to them. So you want to make sure that you do kill these ads off before they reach the fixated player. You can slow these ads, but they cannot be stunned, so you need to make sure you switch to them quickly. On top of this, choking vine flowers will spawn around the edges of the room every now and then and grip in 1 or 2 players. These flowers deal ever-increasing ticking damage to the gripped players until those players move 20 yards away and break the chain, so it's probably how the trash beforehand probably should have worked. Now the tank needs to keep an eye on the boss and use active mitigation on the Timber Smash cast. This will just do a ton of physical damage to the tank and knock them back. And on Mythic, the tank needs to make sure they pick up the Succular Lasher ad that will be spawning in melee. These will just be spawning pools of goo on the ground, so you need to make sure you're not standing in that either. Now it seems that all of these ads need to die quickly on Mythic, not just because they're really annoying, but also the boss can drain their HP and heal himself up. We actually never got to see this happen firsthand, but it is listed in the dungeon journal, and generally the ads are a pain in the arse, so to kill them off anyway. On top of this, the boss will be applying poisonous spores to the group, which is just a permanent dot which just stacks up over time. So really it's all about just killing the ads, breaking your choking vine chains, and just nuking the boss down before his damage output gets too high. Now after you kill this boss, you'll cross the bridge and go up another spiral staircase. You'll now be fighting a lot of imps which leave a nasty stacking dot on the tank, as well as these scavengers that will be throwing books at you, which are indicated with a little swirly circle. If you stand within the circle, you'll either be silenced or you'll be stunned, and generally it's bad, so just make sure you move out of these swirly circles. After this, you'll clear out an area with 4 curved bookcases, and there you'll fight a mini-boss called Gaze Rags.
Now Gaze Rags has one really devastating ability, which is Blinding Glare. At the end of this cast, he'll do a huge burst of damage and stun anyone that is facing him when the cast ends. So as soon as you see the ability being cast, you need to make sure you turn your back to him. He'll also do bursts of damage to your group over 6 seconds when he casts his Focus Destruction. This damage is completely unavoidable. However, what is avoidable is the exploding patches that are spawned underneath your feet when he casts Fell Glare. After he dies, the second boss will jump down, called Thrashbite the Scornful. Now this guy has very, very simple abilities, however almost every single one of them will one-shot you if you don't deal with them properly. For the tanks and the melee DPS, you need to watch out for when he casts Pulverizing Cudgel. After this cast is finished, he'll do a large burst of damage to everyone in the group, whilst one-shotting anyone within 15 yards of him. You have more than enough time to move from this ability, the cast time is relatively long, and to prevent a lot of movement, ranged players should always make sure, of course, that they're more than 15 yards away from the boss. However, you don't want to stay too far away, you want to make sure you're within this inner circle of the room, because when the boss casts Heave Cudgel, the boss will throw his weapon around the outside of the room and it will slowly spin round, and if you get caught by this, you'll be one shot. It doesn't move very fast, and again it's quite predictable, so it's quite easy to avoid it. The last ability that he'll cast is Scornful Gaze. What he'll do is fixate a gaze onto a player, and then after 7 seconds he'll charge towards them. If any players comes into contact with this charge, they're pretty much one shot again. However, if he hits a bookcase, he will destroy the bookcase and be stunned for a short period of time. So the moment that the fixated player has identified that they're about to be charged at, that player needs to move behind the bookcase so the boss slams into that instead of their face. Now in Mythic, each time a bookcase is destroyed, 2 book ads will spawn, and there are 3 different types of them. All 3 of them have one special ability that they'll cast infrequently, but apart from that they just spam arcane bolts at players which deals a small amount of damage. The satirical book will silence everyone for 5 seconds, the fictional book will slow everyone in the group, which can obviously make dealing with some of the boss's abilities quite difficult, and the biographical book will mind control random players, and you can only break this mind control by knocking the player down to 30% health. So as you can see, these book effects on top of all the boss abilities, super fucking nasty. You need to make sure that you kill these books as soon as they spawn, and then go back to the boss. But apart from that, there's not much else to the encounter apart from the fact that you only have 4 bookcases. So if you've destroyed them all and the boss is still alive and he's about to do his 5th, people are going to slowly die off one by one as they get hit by the charge. So the idea is you kill him before this point even happens. One interesting thing though, each bookcase that you do destroy will actually leave a steamy romance novel on the floor, and if you read all 4 books, you'll actually get an achievement for doing it, so that's pretty cool.
Now after you kill Thrashbite, the door behind him opens and you can continue on with the rest of the instance. The next room that you'll be doing is absolutely chock full of enemies. However, as soon as you tag one of them, most of them will be running away and into this portal on the far side of the room. So we cleared out the room, went over to the portal, tried to interact with it in any way we could, but it seems like the portal's just there for, for show. It doesn't actually do anything. After ascending another spiral staircase, you will come to an area coated in spider webs. Here you'll deal with little spiders that leave a stacking dot on the tank, and when they die they leave goo on the floor, so of course you need to kill them before the dot gets too high. But you'll also be dealing with one last mini boss, which is Nalasha and her spidery minions. Now, her spidery minions include enforcers, which just have a frontal cleave, so just face them away from everyone else. But they also have orb casters, and these guys are pretty vicious. They will spawn fell orbs that kind of work like a mage frost orb, which basically just deals ticking damage as they slowly move in a straight line, so you want to dodge that the best you can. And they'll also apply burning strands to people, which will root them and reduce their haste. Now, the main thing Nalasha will be doing is vanishing and spawning behind a random player in the group. She will then cast Venom Storm, which is just a frontal cone which deals an extremely high amount of damage to anyone hit. So as soon as she teleports, you want to make sure that you are not in front of her, otherwise you could easily get comboed and die. When she teleports, she'll also be leaving behind a patch of webs on the ground. These will slow you and also reduce your haste, so make sure once again you're not standing in these patches. However, it can be fairly hard to see with all of the other webbing all over the floor. She'll also summon some spiderlings from before that will descend from the sky. You just need to make sure that the tank can pick those up nice and quick, but then not just randomly hitting DPS. But generally speaking, when fighting this pack, you just want to AoE down all of the little spidery minions, so you can just focus on killing Nalasha by herself. After you finished off that mini-boss, Illidan and Maiev will tag along behind you as you run up another spiral staircase. Midway up this, there is another chapel-like room with a single enforcer ad inside, as well as a bunch of egg sacs, although these egg sacs don't do anything when you run over them. So our guess is that this room is probably going to be used for something like a world quest boss in the future. Once you reach the top of the stairs, you'll get to the last room in the instance where you'll be fighting the last two bosses. This room, just gotta say, is absolutely awesome with all the broken stained glass windows and the fell corruption covering the walls and the Aegis standing in the middle. And once you use the Aegis, this will cause the next boss to spawn, which is Domatrax. So during this fight with the Aegis itself, you'll need to be hiding inside of it at certain times. When you hide inside it, it will reduce the damage you take by 90%. However, it will reduce the healing and damage you do by 75%. Also, the Aegis has an energy meter which you can see within the boss frames, and when this is used up, you can no longer gain its effects. So you only want to be using this Aegis when you are about to take a ton of damage, which is when the boss casts Chaotic Energy. This is quite a long cast, and once he finishes it, it'll just do a huge amount of damage to the entire group. So if you're not within the Aegis, it's likely to one-shot any non-tank player that isn't using a huge damage reduction. So to make the most out of the Aegis, you want to move within it at the very last second of the cast, and then quickly leave it afterwards. This way you'll continue doing full damage for the majority of the time, without wasting too much of the Aegis' energy. Now the boss will also cast Fell Soul Cleave at the tank. This will just do a burst of fire damage and a cone in front of the boss, but it'll also remove an absolute ton of energy from the Aegis. So as a tank, you want to face the boss towards the wall, and once the cast begins, you can actually sidestep out of it to avoid taking any damage whatsoever. Just make sure you don't face it at the Aegis. Now when the boss reaches 90% HP, he'll spawn 2 Fell Portal Guardian ads. These guys will hold open a portal which imps will spawn out of, and these imps will just blast random players, dealing damage to them and anyone within 4 yards of them, and it does a fair amount of damage, so you do want to be spread at least 4 yards apart when these imps are active. Now the main thing these Guardians will be doing is also casting something called Approaching Doom. This is a 20-second long cast, and once it's over they'll spawn 1 giant Searing Overlord ad. This ad has a fair amount of health, but the bad thing about it is that it's doing constant ticking damage to the entire group, which is even more damage that your healer needs to heal, and of course you don't want to have that. So you want to make sure that you kill these Portal Guardians before they get the chance to spawn any of these Searing Overlords. Once the boss reaches 50% health, he'll spawn another set of Portal Guardians that will spawn imps. However, on Mythic, this second set of Guardians will spawn Hellblaze Mistresses instead. These need to be picked up and moved away from ranged players as they have an AoE that will knock back and do a large amount of damage to anyone within melee range. Once you've killed off the Portal Guardians, you need to make sure you finish off these Mistresses as soon as possible, and then finish off the boss. At low health, the boss will actually gain a Frenzy, which will increase his attack speed and physical damage done by a fair amount, so tanks, you probably want to make sure that you have some sort of cooldown towards the end of the fight just to make sure you can survive this Frenzy and you don't get too battered.
And after you've managed to get the hang of it and you've managed to kill that guy off, a bunch of Dreadwings will fly in from each of the windows in the room. And while you're killing those off, even more Dreadwings will do flybys in the room and just drop bombs on your head. Once you've killed off those Dreadwings, Illidan will jump through the ceiling and will begin to start killing even more Dreadwings on the outside of the room, leaving you to deal with the final boss, Mephistroph. This boss has 2 phases, and before you pull him, you'll need to pick up the Aegis. Picking up the Aegis gives you an extra action button that will spawn a shield around you. You don't need to use this shield in phase 1, but you'll probably want your tank to have it so he can use it in phase 2. During phase 1, the boss has 3 abilities. He'll cast Carrion Swarm at your tank. This will just do a frontal cone on him that will do a large amount of damage and leave goo on the ground, so you want to make sure that you face the boss towards the wall. This prevents anyone in your raid getting hit, but also gives you extra room. He'll also cast Dark Solitude. This deals splash damage to everyone in the room, and also applies a dot to them. You need to make sure that you're spread apart when this is cast, so you don't take extra damage. And on Mythic, he has Demonic Upheaval. This is a debuff that is applied to 2 players that will cause a giant circle to spawn on the ground after it expires. Shortly afterwards, the circle will erupt and a giant pillar will come out of the ground, which deals a large amount of damage to your entire group and an even larger amount to anyone stood within the circle. So the best way to deal with this ability is that as soon as you receive the debuff, move towards the edges of the room just to keep everything clear. After dealing with those abilities for so long, the boss will reach 100% energy and he'll disappear, and then you'll enter phase 2. Illidan will now swoop down into the middle of the room and start to gain energy. Once he gains full energy, you'll then return back into phase 1. During the time that he is gaining his energy, various shadow versions of the boss will spawn around the edges of the room and will begin to shoot orbs towards Illidan. And if they hit him, it'll interrupt his energy regeneration. As soon as the orbs come into contact with a player, they'll do a burst of damage and will be absorbed. If you have the Aegis, you'll take no damage whatsoever from these orbs. You can run around the room trying to catch these orbs. This is what we did for the first try, but it does feel like the best strategy really is just having your tank in the middle and just have him rotate his character, getting the orbs as they come towards the middle. If 1 or 2 orbs hit Illidan, it isn't a massive deal. However, you really need to make sure that you soak as many as possible, because if this phase does go on for too long, your healer isn't going to be able to put up with the ever-increasing ticking damage that's going out on your group, and this is basically pseudo-enrage mechanic going on in this particular phase. Also, Mythic, bats will start doing flyby bombings again, which forces you to move out of the circles that spawn. Now, although it looked like the shadow ads that spawn around the edges of the room that are throwing orbs towards the boss, it looks like they might be killable, but it doesn't really seem like you need to. However, if you are able to, it would definitely reduce the amount of orbs that are going towards Illidan, making this phase a lot easier for whoever is catching the orbs. But providing you do soak those orbs, Illidan will gain all of his energy back, and then the fight will simply go back to phase 1, and you'll have to repeat this over and over again until the boss finally dies. And that's the fight.
And that's the instance. So yeah, it's a pretty cool one. It's definitely got some pros, mainly the environment. I think the instance itself looks awesome.
Yeah, I think the way that they're integrating the 5-man with the raid, it being in the the same location.
Yeah,
I think that's a really nice way of encouraging people that do go do this dungeon to somehow try and get involved with raiding. Perhaps you've never raided before.
Yeah, maybe.
You can look down and be like, oh, what the fuck's going on down there? Oh, it's a raid. Oh, I guess I'll have to go to do the raid to go see that. That's always a good thing. But the instance itself, I think they've done a really, really good job in the way that it looks. All the different environments as well is nice. You've got this balcony area, then you've got the garden, you've got the library, the spiders afterwards, and then finally in the Legion area.
Yeah, it's quite nice because sometimes you go through a dungeon, like, say, Darkheart Thicket, and it's like most of the time it's just, there's a lot of flowers,
it's the same shit, and then a tunnel, yeah.
Yeah, well, a swamp, then a tunnel. Let's give it some credit. Well, there's actually a mist, then a swamp, then a tunnel. But either way, it can get a little bit samey. There's some of these instances. So the fact that, it is all the same architecture still, but you've, got, a nice little twist with all of these, kind of different rooms and that. And some of the bosses are quite fun as well. I really like the second boss, Thrashbite. The way he just, insta-kills everyone if you muck up.
I mean, that's the great thing about 5-mans, these days, is that there are mechanics that will actually one-shot you.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see that they've continued that into this dungeon.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, this boss, if you muck up any of his 3 key mechanics, you are going to die. And with the books that come out on Mythic, they're also incredibly vicious. Even the one that you might not think is that bad, which is the slowing one, it tends to slow you as the boss does the AoE circle underneath him. So if you're too close to the boss and you haven't got some way of having a movement speed increase, you're kind of screwed and you are going to die. So that boss is really, really vicious, but I like the idea of him, kind of thrashing into bookcases, and his voice acting is awesome. It's one of the bosses I'd recommend, throwing game sounds on for, because him shouting and that is really quite funny. But other bosses in here, none of the bosses in here are bad, by any means. Maybe, the first boss isn't anything particularly, I'm not going to write home about it or whatever, or maybe the same with the third boss as well. It's kind of, I don't know, the interacting with the Aegis is quite a neat idea. But it's nothing super crazy, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. I would say that these bosses are definitely up to par with the rest of Legion.
Yeah, nothing in there is bad. It's just the bosses, I'd say, are very average, apart from, like you said, the second boss. The second boss is cool as fuck, the way that he just goes around smashing everything. But yeah, the other bosses are a little bit average.
Yeah, there's nothing.
Which isn't bad.
Yeah, it's nothing like super bad. Maybe a bit disappointing if you're going in here with like wide eyes, like, oh, what are they going to show us all new and shiny? And it's just like, it's decent, but it's not like the best thing in the entire world. As for the trash, there is quite a lot of it, especially if you're going through and killing every single last thing like we did, because we wanted to see, you know, every nook and cranny in the place. But it does seem like you can skip a fair amount of it, which is good because especially going into Mythic Plus, you know, you can make choices on what trash packs you maybe want to pull. Maybe you do want to do that crazy mini boss at the beginning, or maybe you're just going to pull extra rooms throughout the instance as you run through. You know, depending on your composition, you might make those sort of choices, which I think is quite a neat idea. But the trash itself, there's a lot of impactful mobs. Like, as you said at the beginning, a lot of the trash has at least one ability. Like, each of the mobs have one ability, which is a pain in the ass. Yep. Like, so you've got the demonic menders, you know, they've got all that healing going out. You've got the shadow walls that you need to be dragging mobs out of or trying to interrupt.
The knockback from the bats.
The silence from the bloody little...
Fellstalkers.
Yeah, the dog things. It's crazy. There's so much going on, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just means, like, if you are going to pull everything, you either need to annihilate it or chain CC, or, you know, you just don't pull everything all at once. But my favorite thing in the entire instance is from the trash, and it's those AoE bubbles. The ones that deal ticking damage to you as well as give you haste. I think it's going to be awesome in high level Mythic Plus because you're going to make those decisions. Like, say it's fortified or something, so they're going to be dealing a ton of damage to you. Should I be standing in the bubble in order to do with that extra damage? Like, it's a really, like, risk-reward sort of mechanic, but I'm going to be taking an absolute ton of it. So, like, if your group's really pushing for it, maybe you'll have everyone standing in the bubble just to, like, try and push out that extra damage to get, like, the key done in time.
Absolutely mental pulls.
Yeah, in this instance, you could do some insane pulls. Yeah. There's, like, some more Souls level pulls.
Well, and all the, like, little rooms as well is a great area to go and lost them as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, this instance, I think, on high level Mythic Plus is going to be really fun.
It's going to be interesting to see how people do it.
And you're going to be able to do some pretty crazy shit. So that's always exciting to see how different people can develop different strategies for it. But the instance overall, just to sort of conclude the video, it's okay. It's a good instance. It's very average. The bosses are very average, apart from obviously the second one that we already mentioned. If you was to compare it to, say, like Karazhan,
I'd say Karazhan is way cooler.
Karazhan's way better, yeah. On a first playthrough, Karazhan is way better. This instance is, I'd say, is very much on par with everything else you've already seen through this expansion in regards to 5-mans.
Yeah, so
except, well, apart from Halls of Valor. It's 10 times better than Halls of Valor.
Yeah, so it's a very solid dungeon. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just, you know, you go in there and you have some fun. It's a nice length as well. You're not going to be in there all day, which is awesome. So thank you very much for watching, guys. If you did enjoy this video, then do lob a like on it. It helps us out a lot. Also, a huge shout out to all of our supporters over on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. You guys rock. And of course, we will see you all in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.